Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jens Heitland Show, where I interview experts from different fields to connect the dots of innovation and entrepreneurship. Today's episode is another Innovation Breakfast Club episode, where I meet with previous guests to dig deeper into one specific topic. Today's topic is walk the talk or action over perfection. Please welcome to the show Joshua, Werner, and Dennis. Hello and welcome to another Breakfast Club or Innovation Breakfast Club, guys. Great to have all of you in. And we have amazing backgrounds today.
Yeah, a combination of the studio, some fans joining from Montenegro, look like they're in the vineyard.
Yeah.
For those who are watching on YouTube, and then the master innovator in the room is in his production studio, crunching some heavy production over the last couple of days, and is definitely going to keep us all honest in this conversation that we've got up. But great to be back with you guys.
I tried to
do the same. Greetings. Thanks again, Yen. Greetings from Montenegro. Hopefully my connection's going to hold, but yeah, it's always awesome to join you guys. Thanks.
Same here.
We will manage.
Greetings from
even if you cut out.
Greetings from Holland, and from a rainy Holland. It's not as nice as it was a couple of weeks ago, but it's especially good for having a conversation about perfection. Or something along those lines.
Yeah,
so, exactly. Something along that line. Let's get started, guys. Not too much warm up today. Topic for today: walk the talk or action over perfection. And everything that comes to mind around that. And of course, we always bring the business perspective and the innovation perspective as part of that. So having shared the topic like yesterday or the day before to you guys, what have been the first things that came to your mind? Let's start with Joshua.
So where it sort of first took my mind and where it took my thinking initially, Jens, when you shared it with us, was around the concept of perfect is the enemy of good. And I think that it can sometimes become a self-inflicted paralysis that we place on ourselves when we think about the engagement space or the task that we're trying to create, and we think about how perfect can I make it rather than how good can I make it. And I think just that simple change in wording can invoke different ways of thinking about things, different ways of approaching things, but also different actions. Because I think that's what you really highlighted when you mentioned, walk the talk, is how do we turn this into action? And so that's where I started my thinking, and keen to hear what Dennis and Werner have to add to that.
Let's go to Montenegro. Werner.
Live from Montenegro. So, jokes aside, let's get into it. I think when I first saw the topic, I got excited because my initial gut feeling is that I'm leaning towards a little bit of perfection. I want to do the Dennis thing again and say, let's look at perfection. The reason I'm saying that, so first of all, I think that we come from a generation, myself, where we were bogged down by perfection. We didn't take action. I mean, in my career, I've seen a lot of times where when I worked at big corporates, where we got really kind of stuck in the mud, not doing things, right? And there's been a shift in the market where there is really a move towards action. And I think like a lot of the leaders that I work, they understand it. They understand that they need to move. They need to kind of shift things. But now that action is being placed in the hands of people who don't understand that, you should do something that is good enough. That's what I'm trying to say. I've seen too many projects go out where it's terrible. I feel like that grim like tale. I don't know if you guys know the story about the emperor with the news clothes, the emperor's news clothes, where he gets a bunch of people in to make him a whole new outfit. Actually, he's a bunch of con artists, and he gets dressed in this outfit, and they say, like, you can only see this outfit if you're not stupid. And he got outside, and a lot of people say, like, how great this thing is. It's awesome. It's brilliant. And then one geek popped up and said, like, but the guys make it. And I feel like what is happening a lot of times is that we are pushing products into the space of action without actually considering what are we trying to achieve with that. So maybe with that long ramble, I think maybe the conversation also about defining what is action and what is perfection, because that's two definitions that we might be, we need to get aligned around. I hope that made
Good
sense
one.
out of Montenegro.
Yeah, we lost you a little bit in between, but I think the point got across. So already apologizing for Werner's connection for everyone who's listening. We
Yeah,
still
sorry for that,
agreed
guys.
to keep him in and let him be part of the club, because he's one of the founding members of the Breakfast Club. And it's important to have him in. Dennis, what did you think?
Well, and I love piggybacking off of good things that are being said, even though they sometimes fall away. The good things came across, Werner, and for you as well, Josh, but in very clear voice. So I have a little bit of a different view, uh, as I always do, in that sense, because I have learned. I have a background in industrial design, so I've learned how to. I would say how to be creative and come towards an end result. But I started a company where, for me, it was very important to be in the first part of the process, and that you share early so that you can fail fast, fail forward. And the idea there is that once you learn how to do that, it's very difficult. I would say I love sketches. I love sharing sketches, but it's never the end result. And when I share a sketch, I would always say, it's just a sketch, because it's subject to change. And I really like that. It's a good thing. But I would say lately I've been more embracing the creation of the stuff that I like to make. I would say I'm embracing my inner artist, or the fact that I am an artist who is trying to get to a point where once I am satisfied, I can share it with the world what I'm doing. And this is where perfection really, really, really gets in the way, because as an artist, you're never satisfied. I would say as a designer, you're rarely satisfied, because you want to do and make the best thing that you can make. And there's always limitations, because things move forward and things move on. But what if you don't have somebody telling you that you need to move forward? Then sometimes, or most of the time, I get stuck, because I just make the things that I want to make. And once in a while, something comes out and everybody says, wow, that's really nice. And even then, I'm not satisfied, because it's like, oh, okay, so I shared that, but it could have been better, blah, 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 blah. And you find excuses about the difference between perfection and sharing it. And I must say that's an interesting thing for me. So when you're a part of a process, and you need to move forward because you're working with different people, talking about defining action, um, then perfection gets in the way of many people. But once you use it for yourself, perfection can be something that can lead to a certain form of pride when you're done, when you have made it perfect, and then you put it into the world. It's a baby that you can say, yes, I'm proud of this. And in that sense, I'm a bit torn between the two. I love action. I love doing things fast, but rarely I'm satisfied about the product that has been shared into the world. And in that sense, it's a good start. How about you, Jens? Action versus perfection. I know a little bit of your preference.
Yeah, we know each other a little bit. I start with walk the talk, because for me it's not really, it's not too important to say it's either or. It's either action or perfection. It's more about understanding of when it is important to be on which end, and go more into that direction or more into that direction. And I think the combination of it, at least in my experience, is the power of the totality. And then walking the talk for me is being honest and open about it as well, on, hey, this is not good enough, we need to move towards something that's better, so which drags towards the perfection. And as well, walking the talk when it comes, hey, we need to take action, then it's not just talking, it's like doing it. because still, if we go into the corporate world, which I always love to do, there's a lot of talking but less walking, because people are dragged into perfection. If you want to launch a product in a large corporation, it takes you years to get it out in some organizations because it needs to be perfect.
Yeah.
um and I think that's why I wanted to start this as well, and I have a couple of examples which I will share later. Werner,
Yeah, I
you
just
wanted
wanted to
to
say,
say
I think
something?
the common thing that I think comes up, Jens, with you and Dennis, is also that I think there's a difference between action and what moves you forward.
Yeah.
Right. So if your actions are moving you forward, then I'm all for it. Go for it. Because I also think, like, I want to add what you said, Jens, is that I think in corporations you will get a lot of people that are super busy. I mean, I just had a project now where we were discussing with a senior manager around, I was really struggling to actually engage with some of the participants in some of the work we were doing because they were really busy. But then the senior person said to me, "But are they busy on the right things?" Right. So I think sometimes there's a lot of action, but the action is not action that moves you forward.
Well, not,
Yeah.
I tend to agree, but sorry, Joshua, but and before I forget, because I'm writing and I'm thinking at the same time, and when you move forward, so a lot of people would say any step is a good step because at least you're moving. But and like Jens already said, it's the combination of the doing and the thinking that gets us into troubled waters sometimes, because it's the balance of companies that might be very good at doing and do less thinking, and companies that do a lot of thinking, do less doing. They're both moving forward or moving somewhere. It's up to, I would say, people who are engaging with those companies, if they agree with what their successes are or how they grow over time. But I think it's an interesting difference, the action steps and the effect that they have. It's the difference between doing everything in your company and looking at what's happening outside the company.
Yeah, so Dennis, just before diving into that a bit deeper, going back to something that you mentioned about being proud of what you're producing. And Jens and I had a podcast in a different setting this morning, and we were chatting to one of the founders, Sabina Iman, about her business Blink, which is a new dating app. And she shared something on LinkedIn which really resonates with that element that you talked about being proud of things. And it's a quote where it says, "When we focus on the way we did something in the past, that's based on ego. When we focus on the way we do something, or the way that when we focus on the way we will do the future, that's based on pride. Real progress happens in the present." And if you think about what that means from about action and the way that you feel about something, or the emotion that you attach to it, how can you think about that pride element when you think about action, and not base it too much on your past experiences or your past interactions, but really about what are you creating and what does that mean when you live inside of the present. And I know that's a big concept, and we'll bring it back down to earth in terms of talking about that inside of a business setting and why some that potentially leads to inaction. And the thread that I'll use to do that is around our association and our relationship with risk. And I think that when we think about things, and we think about action in particular, why is it that we always think about action as moving things forward? Does that potentially change the way that we engage with things? Because to move something forward means that you have to take a risk. What if you de-risk the entire situation, or rather minimize the risk inside of the situation by just saying we need to have some form of action? And that may be moving back, because action doesn't always need to be forward. Sometimes you need to go back in order to go forward.
Yeah, love that. I was always saying in the company I worked in before, that kind of life and business is like a dance. You're going forward and backwards and to the side, and sometimes you take turns, and that's all action in itself. So it's all movement. But sometimes if you dance with a partner, then you need to take 5 steps back to be able to get the space that you can move on again. And I think that's the magic in it. And maybe just giving a very down to earth example on what I learned just the last couple of weeks on that. I've been doing this daily vlog, which like only 2 people in the whole world know about. Um, and I went to the level that I was spending a lot of time on getting the best quality ever, and then I was losing the authenticity by just doing it. And I was skipping a couple of days because I know if I do it with the professional camera, I need the laptop, I need to do all of that. It's like perfectionist perspective. Um, and then I'm losing the content, which is the most important for me because it's a documentary of what I'm about to do and doing. And then I just said, screw it. I will go back to mobile phone recording, and then I will just do it and share it in different ways. And it's fine for me if people are not watching at it because it's a documentary first and foremost for myself. I want to look 5 years ahead. Like in 5 years, I want to look back and look into what did I do on September the 1st in 2021. Oh, I was doing a podcast with these dudes. And then looking forwards, like, okay, what happened? How did I think in that time? And that's just one of the examples where I've seen for myself is go out of the perfection corner and go walk the talk again, which is like doing it. And while doing it, of course, you can get better, but it's also sometimes good enough is enough instead of doubling down more on quality if it's not a commercial video, as an example. Yeah, just a little deep dive.
Yeah, so I sort of love where you went with that, Jens, and I think it's a great example to make it practical in terms of giving us something and those who are listening to think about as an example. And going back to some of the questions that you sent out around why some organizations are reactive and not proactive, and where my thinking went with that, and tying it to the example I've used about actually enjoying the process and not seeing the process as sort of a weight that you need to do to make something perfect, because I think that also interacts and is received by the listener or the intended audience in this case in a different way, and also makes them identify with you on a different level. And I think that where sort of some of that thinking can go is around things like the Gartner hype cycle or the adoption curve, when you think about how those different pieces of the elements interact. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with that adoption curve or the hype cycle, the first phase is sort of trigger technology, peak, and then you move into peak of inflated expectations. Then sort of once you've got to the peak, you go down into the trough of disillusionment, and then you go up to the slope of enlightenment, and then you move into the plateau of productivity. And why I found that sort of useful in terms of this thinking around perfectionism is because I think that you need to also be cognizant of where you are inside of a curve, or where you are in sort of side of an interaction, because sometimes you need more leaning towards perfectionism. And I'm sure that those are the people on the call today that may disagree with that statement. But I do feel that sometimes, Dennis, you gave the example of different types of art that you create. Sometimes there's you in a room where you can just produce what is good enough. But other times there does need to be a lean towards the more perfectionist, the more smaller, high-touch details. And I think going back to the previous conversation that the four of us have had is around the superpowers of innovation. I think being able to read those situations is critical to understanding when to walk the talk and when maybe just to do the talking inside of a room.
Yeah, I like the thinking around that, and I would like to make it a little bit more practical to move to a way that people can identify with, or at least what I learned a couple of years ago when I started skiing for the first time. The idea when you learn how to ski is that at some point you need to lean forward in order to move forward, and if you don't, you just scrape down the hill. You move forward and you get down to your goal, but you don't do it in an elegant way. And in that sense, when you start to make the move to getting your feet on the same track and taking the risk that you know that you could fall, and then moving forward and going through the acceleration and then learning to stop and then move your skis to the other side. That whole loop of doing that, that's if you can be as a person, somebody who has experienced that, and then move that towards anything that you're doing. That's exactly what you need to do in any process. First you need to weigh the risks and look at the environment, look at what you're dealing with, and then at some point you need to go over your first risk assessments, and you're taking your first risk and deciding to go for it, and then move and then stop again, and then take the next turn and the next turn and the next turn and the next turn. And I think that we've learned how to go down the hill safely, and that's the best way to maybe also describe the fact that we don't like to be hurt. We don't, and we've learned how to maybe take less risks, and we admire the people who take a lot of risk because they end up going the fastest, and it looks the most beautiful. Even when they fail the hardest, and it hurts the most, but it's the biggest hero story. But if you end up in the middle, if you do things in an average way, you don't get hurt, but you move forward. And this is I think one of the most interesting things about when you say our company's active or reactive, is that a company with a whole lot of people with a lot of risk involved might tend to go for the middle of the road because they're responsible for a whole lot of people moving forward together. But it's interesting that we admire the go-get attitude of startups, and it seems like everything can go and you can take all the risk you want, but they tend to go into the same direction at some point. When things work, they set it down because they find a process, and then the first step towards investment is the fact that they have a process, and then it needs to improve instead of innovate. And have to go through some loops of getting better. And that's actually exactly the same thing of going down a hill on a ski. At some point, it's going to get boring when you do that all the time. You go up and you go slowly down, and you go up and you go slowly down. And this is where I would say we get the new way of thinking, is that we are all encouraged, or at least I'm encouraging my kids to go for it. To just do the things like you think you can do, as opposed to how I was brought up. And like you mentioned earlier, Werner, we were brought up to be perfectionists and to have a role within a certain set of functions within a society. But now, there's so many things you can do, and you can hook on to so many other things. You can just do it, and you need some people, they just need I would say, what's the word for that? The permission to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And that's, and having the permission to fail, having the permission to take risks, that's a difficult thing to master. But moving backwards and forwards, that's an interesting thing towards action and reaction.
I would like to double down on the risk.
Yeah.
I agree with what you say. Sometimes, and I've seen it quite often as well, that it's perceived risk. So you as the person standing there on the ski slope, you think like, holy crap, that's risky what this person is doing. If you are that person because you have done it 2,000 times, then it's like, it's not risky at all. That's like, maybe you're taking an easy day.
Yeah.
So the perceived risk from the outside, and that goes back to the big organizations where reactive and proactive, sometimes it's just from the outside, it is perceived risky, or the other way around. From the inside, it is perceived risky, and your customers don't care even if you would do something that's not 100% perfect. So I think that's also what other people think is an interesting one in that mix as well. Werner, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I just want to add something to what you're saying, and I don't want to come across as negative, but then also sometimes, who is actually taking the risk? Is it you personally, your team, or is it your organization?
Yeah.
Right. And I think for some teams, it's very easy to say, yeah, let's take the risk, because if something goes wrong, you get to go home and hang out with your kids, right? And then come back to work the next day. And then your manager or the organization takes the knock. And I'm not trying to say it in a negative way. It's just like consider now I'll explain it with a little story, and hopefully my connection holds for the story. But a couple of years ago, we were doing a big campaign, and one of my team members were kind of the head of the campaign. And I looked at the campaign, so my job was to review it. And I looked at the campaign and I went, "This is never going to work." But then at that stage, I wasn't able to really say to him, "Listen, I think we need to kind of shut this down." I also wanted to become a better leader, right? And I said I started talking to him, and he wasn't really like open to have a conversation about it because they've worked so hard on this campaign. And then what I did is I went to each member of the team and I said, "Listen, guys," and I had separate conversations. I said, "Are you willing to sign off on this strategy? Are you willing to put your personal name on this strategy and say, listen, myself as Bob, I'm willing to sign off?" And each and every one of these team members, like 10 of them, said no. Finally, I went back to the lead of that team and I said, "Listen, John, are you willing to sign off on the strategy?" This is the guy who was like super sensitive about, "Are you personally willing to sign off on the strategy for this campaign? That is going to work. It's going to deliver the results." And he said no. And that for me was the interesting learning, and like for that team to learn, because it was really good and well to take the action to drive this process through. They did everything right. So I'm not saying they were stupid or they did anything wrong. They did everything right. But in the end of the day, when I asked them, "Are you personally willing to sign off on this?" And I didn't say, "We're going to come take your house or you're going to get a salary cut." I want to put you need to put your name on it. Say, "I believe that this is going to work." Not one single teammate said yes. And that, I think, is interesting, Jens, and what you're saying is like, who's taking the risk? Where's the risk sit? For some people, risk is not, like, I've done this before. But for other people, it's like, it's not really my risk, so let's do it. Let's go.
Yep. So if you throw something in here around the thinking of this notion of risk and opportunity and walking the talk. And I think that sometimes when people hear the phrase walk the talk, they immediately think, okay, I need to act. But the risk in just acting without something bigger driving that action, whether that be a strategy, a broader plan, or something like that. There's a manifesto out in the world that talks about the notion between an opportunity and taking advantage of that opportunity with a strategy or without a strategy. If you think about taking advantage of an opportunity and just walking the talk, so you just dive headfirst into it. And at times I've done it myself, and I've managed to pull things together and thrown myself in the deep end and learn to swim. However, if you dive into this opportunity without a strategy in place, you can arguably say that you are an opportunity seeker. And inside of becoming an opportunity seeker, that means that you're always bouncing around. You don't really know where you're going or why you're doing things, which means that then the risk becomes bigger, because then whether that's you yourself or the business that you're working for taking that risk or that opportunity, you're not doing it with a bigger strategy in mind. You're not doing it with a bigger plan in mind.
Super important. I agree. And that's a very, very valid point, as well, from a part of what Dennis mentions, like acting gives you a direction towards something or from something away. And I think without a direction of travel, without you knowing where you want to be, you end up nowhere. So you can take the best perfect way in going somewhere. If you don't really truly understand which direction is the direction you want to travel, which is the strategic approach you mentioned, then it's useless.
Yeah, and maybe to take that a bit further and talking about, I mentioned the hype cycle and the adoption curve and things like that, and why I think those two ideas fit together is recognizing that sometimes things take time. And I think when we set this expectation and we've got these reference points and these so-called coordinates or ways of working that we are referencing. So like, as a young thinker, you're coming into this space and now you may be starting your entrepreneurial journey, and you're thinking, and you've got these big reference points. You've got the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Elon Musks, the Mark Zuckerbergs, and others. But those things took an extreme amount of time and a lot of contextual factors that created the magical conditions that allowed them to excel. Sure, they maybe went and created them and they were intentional about doing that. And that's what I think sometimes when people think about, again, walking the talk, is you need to be mindful of the broader environment that you're doing it in and what intention are you doing it for. Because sometimes I think otherwise we just end up in this almost like this hamster wheel of consciously doing. And if you don't step off that hamster wheel from time to time to actually evaluate, okay, did I take the right risk? Did I not take the right risk? And it's like Dennis was saying, around failure and those types of things as well. You need to be aware of it. It's not necessarily bad to fail or bad to take the wrong risk, but just create that evaluation space as well. And that's something that I think companies in general can think about intentionally designing into their processes when they think about, should I innovate, shouldn't I innovate, and not just creating an innovation team for the sake of.
Yeah. And I think that's where also the walk the talk is if you dissect it, it's 3 words, but it's usually impactful because it's actually saying that you have to think about what you're doing, and then you have to do it, because it implies that you have talked a lot, but then you have to walk the talk. And the idea there is that I would say there's a lot of walking and there's a lot of talking. And connecting that by these 3 simple words also, I would say, implies to, I think it's eating your own dog food, stuff like that they're saying. It's all based on the fact that people are saying there's been too much talk, and we have this focus on doing stuff now, and we have to go from all the talking towards all the walking. But it is a constant thing, you walk and then you talk, and you walk and you talk. It's a constantly going loop. The difference is, I would say, I'm going to give you the mic, but to finish this up, is the difference is that when you walk, you're doing it in a certain way, expecting that you're going to talk, and when you talk, you do it in a certain way that you're going to walk, so that it keeps going. And sometimes you need to take more time to talk. Sometimes you need to take more time to walk. But it is a constant loop, and it is difficult. And I would say there's a negative connotation to the walk the talk idea for some people, because it's saying, oh, everybody's just talking too much. You have to walk the talk. But it is a life philosophy. I think it's continuously moving, thinking and doing, walk the talk.
Yeah, I mean,
Anna.
I just wanted to get clarity, because maybe I'm misunderstanding, or I missed a gap here. But for me, the conversation is it's about action and perfection, not action and talk. Because when it comes to action and talk, I'm a great colleague of ours, Josh. You haven't met her yet, but she came up with this thing. She blurted it out in the conversation once and Jens, you'll remember this, is do not talk. It's like do not talk, right? So it's better to like Dennis doing now at the moment, scribbling away, like actioning, thinking with his hands. I'm definitely for that, right? But I want to know, for me, the conversation is taking action. In my technology world, people, when people talk about action, they sometimes refer to a MVP, a minimal viable product, prototype, that kind of stuff is action. But then also, when you start looking at those kind of things, how much do you actually put onto it? Do you have to make them perfect? Are they fit for purpose? Where I want to move away from talking. You shouldn't be talking too much. You should be doing, but then when you do it, make sure that you're taking the risk of putting your personal name on it, and you're putting enough on it. Don't go show it a duct tape box or something. Like put enough perfection on it so it actually gets the point across. But that's what I thought we were talking about, or am I missing the point between the action and perfection kind of element?
No, I don't think you're missing it. Sorry,
Yeah.
you go, Josh.
I don't think you're missing it, and it's great how it's come back now to this notion of what is perfection. So we've spent a lot of sort of the last couple of minutes talking about action, And I think, a question that pops to mind, Werner, as you're talking, was around, have we changed the very notion and the definition of what perfection is? And is that contextual, again, because of our relationship with technology? Because now we've got a space where we don't have to produce a product that is finalized, i.e. that means that we can go and change the color of a button on a website, or we can easily go and delete a word rather than having to use a typewriter where you had to retype the entire page if you misspelled a word in the middle of a sentence. And I think it's quite an interesting spin to think about, what does that mean for the way that we think about work and the way that we interact as people, and how that notion of perfection as producing the end product, because that's what I sort of tend to think of as perfectionism, is that you're striving to produce an end product. And I don't think in this always on, always connected world is that we are able to work towards a 100% perfected item.
And maybe I'm giving my age away, Josh, just to because I want to shift it to the clever guys here. But the thing is, the way that I understood initially is when I started my career, is that perfection stopped us from shipping, right? So crafting away on something stopped us from shipping and enabled people like Bezos and Musk and all these other guys to be successful today. I mean, Bezos wasn't the first guy to come up with the e-commerce site. He was the first guy to actually do it. And I can guarantee you there's a whole bunch of other guys actually building it and crafting buttons instead of actually launching it. So I think the perfection here in my world, but I think it's contextually what you understand. In my world, perfection was seen as something that stopped you from actually producing something that you push into market so you can start learning. Because you want to be so perfect that it's going to be just awesome.
So he has an example, maybe, Werner, to bring that down into like a current day example. So for those who are listening and those on the call, I'm sure you're familiar with NFTs, so non-fungible tokens. And if you think about how that space has evolved even just over the last couple of months, and while this example might date this episode a bit, the example that I'll use is Visa purchased a CryptoPunk for $150,000. And now when people hear that, they'll be like, that's an exorbitant amount of money. You're spending $150,000 on a JPEG. But think about that in terms of the broader ecosystem that they're going into. And now that purchase was definitely not perfect, but it was actionable and it was done with intent to show that Visa were coming into this space. They gravitated and gained a huge amount of market share, market noise, communication touch points from creating that purchase. And that was something that in the past may have been frowned upon or stopped because of this notion of wanting to be perfect, wanting to time the market exactly or release the most precise marketing message about that. But that very notion, it was done with a bigger plan in mind, and it enabled them to now come into that space and, gain a lot of marketing, but also gain a lot of wherewithal in terms of the experimentation that we've spoken about in other innovation breakfast episodes and things like that. And I just think that very notion of not having to run everything in terms of the end in mind, but having a bigger plan that you're working towards allows an example like that to really play out over time.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, I want to tie this back to the cultural element of walk the talk, but also action over perfection. Specifically for organizations, it's important to, if you want to navigate that, it's like, what is the right time to talk? What is the right time to walk? What is the right time to go more towards action or more for perfection? You need to bring that into the culture of the organization to be able to run that, because it's often like the person who is working on the product, the person who is working on the topic, they know what it is best right now, or the team that's working, like Werner was saying. How do you navigate an organization and help an organization to get towards understanding what is the right thing to do and when? For me, it's, as I often say, it's all about enabling the people inside an organization to take decision, take action, or go towards perfection. What are your thoughts on that?
I think navigation in this sense is the best word, because I'm I'm thinking we are talking about the same thing, but I'm kind of thinking that the action and perfection is maybe not the right words, but it is the idea that action is something that you do to move forward in a process, which doesn't say when you go for perfection, that's not part of that process. And then a Swiss watchmaker needs to make it perfect, and it takes a certain amount of time. And in that sense, knowing when to rush something because of your competition, or knowing exactly that this you cannot compromise time for anything because it needs to be perfect. Otherwise, your value will go down on the market, or perception of the people who interact with you will go down. And knowing exactly when to do that, that's the difficult thing to do. And we tend to be, and when we go back to the whole thing of risk, when we want to control a situation and at least have a certain way of be sure that you have a 70% out of 100, then you start to control things, and they need to be within an action loop that you're sure that there's no risk. But then it becomes only that. And knowing when to leave that loop and see how you can make it 75%, and then maybe 80, and then 85, and putting out the goals, like you say, like you say, Josh, having a plan to improve, or a plan to innovate, a plan to develop, moves you towards different spaces. But it's a different thing because sometimes I would say I worked on the market a lot, the market, not even the stock market or something like that, but just physically in the marketplace, and you would go there and you would sell, and at the end of the day, if you had a good day, you would make a certain amount of money. But my father always said, if you want to make money, you don't work hard, and you have to be smart. And in that sense, I grew out of that situation because I could get a lot of money in a very short amount of time. But I learned that if I was smart, I could even make more money, or I could be more satisfied. It's not even about money. And going through that loop of knowing when to go out of something that you know, and going into something that will make it better, that's the navigational guide you need to be able to say, well, okay, we always make each other better. That's the goal in life, to improve and to develop.
Love that. And so if you take that's
I think just one thing I want to add.
Werner, you can go.
No, go for it.
Cool. So Dennis, just sort of carrying on that train of thought that you were putting down there, and Jens, linking it to your question about perfection. I think there is a time to be a perfectionist. I don't think that we can, push that aside completely, because Dennis, the example that you used of a Swiss watchmaker is a great example. I think the one thing that springs to mind when I think about putting perfectionism on a so-called pedestal and valuing it above everything else that's going on inside an organization means that you're always striving to be perfectionist. And then if you place it on a pedestal, you run the risk of not celebrating the small wins inside an organization. And that means that you only celebrate big successes, which means that when you think about culture, keeping people motivated and enabling them to do their best work, you can lose and detract a lot of the energy inside of a team and inside of people themselves if you don't celebrate the small wins. And I think that just as, a Swiss watchmaker, when they get that perfect element right and all of the cogs inside of the watch turn perfectly, and they hear that first tick on the watch, that is an extreme amount of celebration that happens inside of them, but also inside of the whole team that's been working on that project. So how can you intentionally design small moments of celebration in working towards this bigger perfect moment that you're wanting to create and that you're seeking to create inside of your team?
So this is I think where contribution to a bigger goal comes into mind, because when you are a singular perfectionist working on a Swiss watch, that's your process, that's your thing that you are doing, that's your celebration at the end. You also celebrate maybe every time the cog fits onto the little peg. It's like, oh my God, this is why people, they tend to be perfectionists, when they like to be going through these perfect little things that make everything perfect. But like you say, when the process gets bigger and beyond person, and you move towards teams, I was thinking about the skier going down slope. Well, what if a bobsled goes down a thing? What if you have a whole team of 30 people in a big boat going down a slope? What do you do then? You just go for it, or do you have a plan in the beginning? Do you have pedals with you to stop at curbs? Do you what? And it needs a plan, and then you get the, I would say, typical way of organizing people. You get strong people at the back, smart people at the front, looking out, looking for bumps and to take whatever, and then you start to move, and then automatically things, when everything works, that the whole thing works, that everybody contributed to a safe landing at the end. And I would say celebrating those different things, that's difficult to do in an organization. Because if somebody does fill in their Excel file in the right way, there's nobody standing there saying, "Hey, that's really good." But maybe there should be, I missed a little paperclip dancing to explain a while back how Word functions. but then it just needs to pop up at some point, say, like, "Good Excel, this really looks good."
Clippy.
But I think this
You want to bring back Clippy. I can't believe it.
Yes.
But I agree, Dennis. That's the key point as well, that contributes to the culture, where we go back then to what we discussed in one of the other breakfast clubs about the leadership angle. How do leaders support this kind of things to happen? And the small things are the big things, like the small parts where a leader is saying, "Hey, this was a great thing. This has contributed to this." That helps an organization to move into that direction. But getting us into the last part, because we have 5 minutes left. What did we learn today? We could definitely go for another hour, but if we drive it to a conclusion, what are things we should take into the next round? What are things we have discovered? What did you learn? What did we miss out?
So I've learned that I think that the way that we look at action and perfection is something that is not misaligned. And when we talk around it, we get to a point where, strangely enough, it gets us talking for a whole hour or even more, and then we're not even sure if we finished at something that is very concrete. There's a problem still there, and I think it lies in that sense in a language or a way of navigating through the difference between when to act and when to listen, or when to make a stand still, or make perfect. And in that sense, that's something that I'm struggling with every day in what I'm doing. So doing just what I'm doing, I would be acting upon our conversation. What I think I would like to do is to see if I can work on the map a little bit more with us, to see how we can show people the difference between action and perfection, and knowing when to use what state would be a huge help, I think, for a lot of people.
I love that idea. That's definitely something we will do in October when we meet physically.
Yeah.
We need to do that.
Nice. Okay, so I'll keep mine quick and short before Joshua drops the knowledge bomb. So I think what is interesting for me, what kind of made me think a little bit, Jens, was what you said about enabling your team to take action. I think that is a really important thing, because for some of us, it can be really nerve-wracking to take action. And as leaders, we need to actually create the space for people and make them feel like they can take action. So I really, really like that, what you said. The only thing that I would like to talk about maybe in the future to discuss is that when I look at the screen, I see three people and myself, And I think for each one of us, perfection means something different. And I think if we are all leaders and we want people to take action, of course, they're going to have in their minds that they want to achieve perfection. But if we don't tell them what is our expectation, what does perfection look like, or, what is good enough, they're gonna strive for their own level of perfection, and that's completely something else. So I think that is something interesting. Define what is perfection? What does that mean? But anyway, Jens, thanks a lot. This was really cool. Thank you. Josh.
Cool, guys. Well, yeah, thanks for another great conversation. And it's crazy how time flies when you really do go down some rabbit holes. So my learnings today, well, there are two of them. The first is that walk the talk is a loop. And Dennis, I've got you to thank for that learning and that articulation of the concept. And I think that that's super important, because sometimes when we think about action or walking the talk, is that we think about it in a linear fashion. We don't think about how walking the talk can actually inform the next action that you take and bring it back and make the walking better or make the talking better. And the second is around that there's actually a need for perfectionism. And I think that we need to stop that stigmatism that's arisen around it, because I think sometimes there is a need and a time to be perfectionist. And I think that's something that I don't quite have the words to articulate why around that today, but it's something that's definitely popped up inside of this conversation, because I think sometimes we can gravitate away from it and almost put it in a closet and not want to be perfectionist. But I do think that there's a time and a place to really pull out those qualities, and that maybe needs a deeper dive around it. But thanks again for your guys' time. And Jens, I'll hand over to you to bring it home.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I also need to say the loop part. I have drawn a loop here, which is like culture, navigation, celebration, movement. So I literally did a little word cloud on my notepad here. It's quite fascinating as well, to the point from Werner, which is like, though that everyone thinks we understand the same with these words I just sent out like two days ago, like walk the talk. Like everyone has a perceived opinion of what that means, and interesting for us is also like good or bad. So you always see it from that perspective. Similar with action to perfection, can be good or bad. And for me, it's one of the question marks I have is, does it matter? Which we will not be able to answer today, but I think it's quite interesting that we took the conversation and leveling out our understandings as the first part, because we needed to find a level we can talk about, and then took deeper dives into it naturally without agreeing on it before, which is always fascinating that we're already in tune like that. But I think we need to, in one of the future sessions, we maybe need to take all the different topics we have had and dive deeper and look into what is the common thread. What are topics we can take apart? Maybe that's part of the map. And we need to get Werner to Sweden as well, that he's joining us on that big table that we can draw it. But let's take that outside of the recording.
Our pedagogiek is coming out.
Yeah, exactly. Super. Guys, thanks a lot for today. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and looking forward to many, many more Breakfast Club meetings. Thanks for listening to today's episode. You will find the links and resources in the show notes of this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, the most impactful thing you can do is subscribing to the show on any of the podcasting platforms and give me a review. This will help me to reach more innovators around the world and bring some of you into the show. If you have any question to the guest or want to engage with me, feel free to reach out to me on my public WhatsApp at +49 151 7033 1176. I will repeat, +49 151 7033 1176. It's all WhatsApp, texting only. Or follow me on social media and contact me there. And finally, if you look for someone educating you or your team on innovation culture coaching, have a look at heitlandinnovation.com. Thanks and see you in the next episode.